and they just made it part of it.
We don't usually.
Which, if you want to play by the rules, I think they do.
Okay, good evening. Thank you all for being part of this regional agreement. You have a packet in front of you. As you know, we've been very fortunate to have the services of MARS, which is Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools. So we're working with two consultants. Maybe you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Right. My name is Mac Reed.
My name is Steve Donovan.
When we get to it,
And we'll introduce ourselves, but maybe just a little brief overview of
okay. Well,
why you're doing what you're doing.
okay, Steve. Pardon?
You can start.
So just my background, I worked in the Groton Municipal Schools for 16 years in the central office, special ed director, pupil services, counselor, principal of the middle school there. I went to Acton Boxborough for 19 years. Half of that time I was the director of personnel. The other half of that time I was principal of the junior high school. I tried to retire and I became the interim superintendent principal in Boxborough where I live. Tried to retire again and I became the superintendent in Shirley for 5 years as we were going through the regionalization process, regionalizing the air in Shirley public schools. And when I finally got to retire officially the third time, I helped found this MARS consulting group. There are about 6 or 7 of us, mainly 3 or 4 of us are doing most of the work. And we have been doing strategic plans. We've been doing sustainability projects, mainly in the western part of the state where the enrollment has been going down significantly. And this will be, I think, our 9th project where we're working on regional agreements where communities, as you know, your last review of your regional agreement was 1991-92, but a lot of the regions in the state, their agreement was originally written in the 50s and 60s, and it has not changed in all that time. So we have been working with other communities, helping them update as we are going to be doing with you.
Great. Thank you, Mac.
And my name, again, is Steve Donovan. I've been in education for 38 years, primarily as a central office person and high school principal. I was a special ed director and director of pupil services for 12 years. And then the last 17 years, I was principal of Acton Boxborough Regional High School and retired in 2008. Since then, I've been working with principal candidates for American International College and working for the EDCO, CASE, and lab collaboratives, setting up professional development for special educators, and working with MARS in both strategic planning and working on regional agreements. So,
Welcome,
So
and we're
we've
happy
both
to
been
have
around
you.
a long time.
Yes. And we'd like to introduce ourselves, and why don't we begin with Frank Lynham.
Frank Lynham, Whitman Town Administrator.
And Frank is not an actual member, but he's sitting in on the meetings.
Sure.
He's my ride home. Dan Subway, Vice Chair, Board of Selectmen, Town of Whitman.
Chris George, I'm the Whitman community member.
Michael Jones, Whitman Hanson School Committee, just sitting in.
Amy Wright, Hanson Finance Committee.
Bob Hayes, School Committee.
Ruth Gilbert Whitner, Superintendent of Schools.
Jim Hickey, Selectman in Hanson.
Jim Egan, I'm the community member from Hanson. Chris Howard, School Committee.
Fred Small, School Committee.
Michelle Lindberg, Secretary and Minute Taker for the committee.
So do you want to take it from
Okay.
here? Okay.
Ruth and I met with Steve and Mac back a few months ago, I think now.
Spring.
Maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and we set up ground rules. We're going to take, this is a subcommittee of the Regional School Committee, and as we move forward, we're going to get on, and hopefully it'll be agreeable to the committee to do it this way, because keep in mind, as we move along, this has to be voted by this committee, any changes. Then it has to be voted by the school committee. Then it has to be voted by both boards of selectmen, and then it has to be agreed to by the Department of Education and Secondary Education. So this process is not going to be an overnight experience. What we would like to probably do, like I said, we talked with Stephen Mack, is when we get the changes done, as this committee moves forward, at the end of the day, we'll vote to agree on the changes. And then at the end, when the thing is completely done, we'll vote a blanket change. Then hopefully, we will get the boards of selectmen here one night. Everybody will explain to them what all of the changes are. We'll go along and let you vote them, both boards of selectmen, and then they'll vote it as a blanket vote, so it's accepted. Then this whole package will be sent to DESI, and they have to vote to agree on it. Isn't that kind of what we envision?
There's one more step, and we're going to go into a little more detail, but the townspeople have to actually vote on it also, after it goes by the selectmen. So the voters in both towns will have to approve it.
Would you be seeking a motion to proceed in that manner?
No, I'm just kind of giving you an overview of what we talked about, Fred, thank you, but what we talked about in the ground rule steps of this. We decide, well, these gentlemen decided, and we decided we would have a chair, and two co-chairs of this committee, one from Whitman and one from Hanson. That way we could keep the selectmen involved, or anyone from the towns, or any of the school committee members, or anybody, so we could keep the meetings moved along. So I'd entertain a motion from anyone for a Whitman chair.
So you need a motion for chair?
Yeah, for co-chair of the school committee. It'd have to be a school committee member. Or one from each community, it wouldn't have to be.
Right. Fred, I mean, I would nominate Fred to be a co-chair for the town of Whitman.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Okay. One from Hanson.
Nominate Mr. Hayes.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Okay. So Michelle is going to be the official note taker. A quorum is 8 people, I believe. We had discussed this.
So there are nine.
Nine now, yeah, 9, you're right. And I would be the 9th that's not on the list.
Right.
So we're gonna need a quorum of at least 5 out of the 9 to vote anything.
Oh, okay, so the quorum is really 5, no?
Right.
It's more than
The
half.
full, the committee, the full committee is 9.
Right.
The quorum's only gonna be 5.
Right, okay.
And our question at the end is whether or not you want to have more than just a basic quorum to vote on the whole package. Our recommendation is that it's a larger percentage than that, because you want to make sure that you have people in this group that are supporting. If you only have 5 out of 9 supporting the package at the end, it's not going to go very well.
Totally agree with you. I would recommend when we do vote the blanket, that we have all 9 members here.
Can I ask a question, Bob?
Yes.
All right, looking at this here, the list of names.
All right, we'll get to that in a second.
I'm saying, who are the members here?
Okay. Ruth and Christine are our support. They are not actually voting members.
Okay.
Fred Small is a member. Chris Howard is a member.
Say Dan Salvage.
Dan Salvucci, there's a mistake on that. It's not David, it's Dan.
I'll fix that.
Rick Anderson from the Town of Whitman Finance Committee. Chris George from the Town of Whitman Community at Large member. Jim Hickey, Town of Hanson Board of Selectmen. Amy Wright, Town of Hanson Finance Committee. And Mr. James Egan, Town of Hanson Community Member at Large. That's 8, and myself, Bob Hayes, Hanson. That gives us 9.
I will revise the member list, and I will indicate who's voting and
Right,
non-voting.
thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. We will be voting at each meeting, as I said, to look at the changes, and then we will take a final blanket vote on the whole as we go. If, as always in any meetings, stop if there's any questions, because that's what these meetings are about. We're revamping a regional agreement, so if anyone has any questions, get your hands up, let's talk about it, let's make sure that everybody's crystal clear on it, and that way there'll be no problems as we move forward with this agreement. Matt?
Do you help me understand at the end, when you said all 9 people, does that mean unanimous vote on the final agreement? What was your intent?
I don't think it would, I think Robert's Rules of Order would come into play, and you don't need a unanimous.
You don't need to, but
I think the intent was to be sure that all 9 members are present.
That's what my intent would be. And again, this is a committee. Is everybody comfortable with at least if we have the final vote that all 9 members be here that evening?
So, I don't know, it would be nice, but it may, you know.
To make a motion and put it into effect, I think could be a problem if we only end up with 8 members.
Well, would you offer remote?
Yeah.
Yes.
A remote presence that
we do
meeting,
offer
right?
remote presence.
And then also just the majority of members would carry the vote. Nothing crazy like a 2/3.
Majority of the committee.
Majority of the committee. Majority of the members that are present.
Right.
So is everybody kind of clear on how we're going to do this voting issue? Keep in mind, as I said, there's a lot of steps for this voting. So we want to keep it as we move forward. Again, I hate to be redundant, but please stop. If you aren't sure what we're voting on, stop. Because if we get to the final vote, I don't want to get in a problem.
All right, I want to make sure I understand what's going to happen. I'm fine up until this group approves it, then it goes to selectmen? Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
No, school committee first.
School committee first.
School committee, then the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, at any one of those steps along the way, there's a possibility of a request for change or more information or whatever. What do we do with that?
We're going to get to that in the next section, actually.
They're going over there.
Okay, good enough, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. But it's a good question, because
Yeah.
again, we don't want to get coming way back to something that we've already hashed over. We want to move it forward as quickly as possible. So is everybody clear on the voting? Everybody good with it? Okay, regional agreement and process. Stephen Mack, you're up.
Okay.
Thank you. Shall.
PowerPoint? Yep.
Oh, one other thing, not to interrupt, but one other thing we agreed on. Meetings will last an hour and a half, part of the ground rules. Unless it's something we are in the middle of and we want to go a little bit, but we don't want these meetings to get overly long, because if they do, it becomes problematic sometimes.
Okay.
Everybody okay with that?
Absolutely.
It can be shorter as well, if we cover the ground.
I have this in the packet, Nick?
yes, you should have this, copies of the PowerPoint in your packet.
PowerPoint should be in your packet, so I'm not going to read it to you. We will flip through it. Following the PowerPoint, we'll get into a more specific blow-by-blow review of the regional agreement process, so this will be just a quick overview. So, why is an update needed? For the 3 reasons that are listed here. There are some terminology changes, school choice, issues like that, like transportation were not addressed prior to Education Reform Act of 1993. The legal and practical issues. We need to eliminate some of the merging of the district language that's currently in the agreement. The school building changes that we're aware of and are going as we speak, I guess. And the interim period that's referred to in the agreement are all areas that we need to clean up a little bit. The opportunity to update agreement with all amendments into one document, and to have build in a 5 or 10 year interval for review going forward as well. The process to amend the overview. I'm not sure where this. Oh, here's that slide. Again, there are 10 steps. I'll go over them step by step, but you have it in your packet, and it starts with forming the Regional Agreement Amendment Committee, which is the RAAC, which is where we are right now this evening, all the way to the final approval granted by the Commissioner of Education. So those are the first and 10th steps, and as I said, we'll go step by step through that in the next phase of the meeting. The Amendment Subcommittee, as Bob said, is a subcommittee of the school committee, and we made some suggestions to membership, and as you can see, most of those, or all of them, have been, you represent one of A through F on this list. Looking at the...
I just want to say about the open meeting law. We are subject to the open meeting law, so all the things that you all have to deal with in your meetings are subject to this group as well.
Yep. And looking at the provisions for modifying the agreement, it's as it exists now, and we'll continue in the next version. The amendments can't change the debt agreements that are already in place, and although it allows for new town members to join, and as long as the debt arrangements can change, and they can assume what's reasonable in that process. The procedures to modify the agreement, the regional school committee can initiate that, or a 10% citizen petition from either of the towns. We're hoping that the regional school committee will initiate and notify the Board of Selectmen of that at some point in the near future. The selectmen then include an article for town meeting, as we mentioned. State laws regarding regional agreements.
Steve, can I interrupt for 1 second? Excuse me. Just to clear up anything for anybody that might be watching. The selectmen will vote this, then they bring it to town meeting. We're going to have to make a presentation at town meeting stating every single change. Here's what it was, here's what the change is. And town meeting's going to vote it. So the townspeople will have a vote totally. I just want that to be right on the open. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The regional agreements must address all sections as outlined in Chapter 71. We're gonna list those and mention each one. The type or model of regional school district, which is really the grade configuration. Identify the current school facilities, which will change next year from where they are today. Composition of the regional school committee and the terms of office. The voting procedures and the voting weights for school committee members need to be addressed. How to fill vacancies on the school committee. Electing officers on the school committee. The powers of the school committee. The apportionment of costs for the region. Incurring debt, how that is derived. Procedures for the use of budget funds. Procedures to change or amend the regional agreement. And procedures to withdraw from the region or admit a new member. All of those will be areas that this group will need to look at and mull over once again. Mac?
I would just add that compared to most of the regional agreements that we've looked at, yours is in pretty good shape. It needs some tweaking, but there aren't going to be major overhauls like we've had to do in a couple of places. I think you're in pretty good shape.
Another significant issue is the governance piece, school committee composition. Since the agreement was written, one person, one vote has taken into effect. We are currently in compliance with the 6-4 split currently. Some language is needed to be flexible. The language needs to be flexible in case of a shift in the population of either town. But right now, it's fine if we are happy with the way that is set up. The 5 acceptable ways to choose school committee members, I'll get to in a bit. The statutory issue as it relates to assessments. Currently, Whitman Hanson uses the statutory method, which is the most common used in the state and is outlined by statute. The only other alternative is the alternative method, which the district would have to propose a method to be approved by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It can be more creative than the statutory method, but both towns must agree and vote on it each and every year. We'll talk a little bit about the statutory method as we go forward. Community Relations Plan. Obviously, this meeting is, we have guests this evening. The RAAC is open to the public. Citizens are encouraged to attend these discussions and debates, and we want to promote and continue ongoing communication with the Selectmen and Finance Committee, which is why they're represented here, and will be kept informed every step of the way. As Bob mentioned, in terms of having public meetings, to get feedback from other groups is going to be important as we go forward, whether it's the combined Selectmen meeting or groups with meetings with other community groups. In terms of a timeline, we're going to talk about that in some depth in the next segment as well. We'll come back to that in terms, but Bob outlined one possibility already. So in sum, the process requires careful thought. We need to develop a significant community relations program going forward and before the annual town meetings. The timeline will be based on the number and the significance of the issues that we identify over the course of the next 2 meetings, perhaps. And we may need legal assistance going forward from regional school district legal counsel as well as town counsel going forward as well. So that's where we're at, and we're going to get into a step-by-step process. It's also a handout in your packet in a minute. With that, I'll turn it over to Mac unless there are some questions so far.
Bill, could you put the agenda back up then, please?
Can we ask questions now?
Sure.
Okay, Bob, one of the questions, when you're talking about at town meeting, we're going to go over each amendment, exactly what it was and what the new one is, and town meeting votes on it. Are they voting on each individual amendment that we've changed, or is it an all or nothing? As I'm saying is, what happens if we have 10 changes and they like 8 of them, but 2 they don't, either town? That stops the process. Where do we go?
They will just be voting on the bottom line if they believe that in general what this group has done is acceptable.
Right, so we'll explain what it is and then they vote on it.
The intention, again, to be, so everybody's open and transparent, would be to explain everyone as we move and then blanket vote it at the very end. Okay. So they understand it, they have questions. Some may not agree with it, but as Mac said, it's the due diligence of this committee, of these members that were appointed, to make sure that those people are heard. So if you have any questions or anyone watching the meeting, as I tried to be kind of upfront, now is the time to get it done. And what I will try to do is, if anyone else would like to come on, I'll try to do a couple cable shows so people might know what we're doing. We'll get, at every school committee member will meeting, we'll make sure that we give, and I'll give a little explanation of what this committee is doing, and maybe bring it out and brief it a little bit and touch on it, so anybody that might want to come forward, Danny, will come forward then, because the process is going to be a little, not wicked lengthy, but we're going to get into it, as you can see. Okay. So to redo it at town meeting would be... Right, ridiculous. Okay, and then a second question that I have, I meant to ask. I'm classified as a member because I'm the Board of Selectmen. I'm up for re-election next year. What happens if I lose? I don't expect to, but what happens if I do? I would say that they would appoint another person from the Board of Selectmen, okay, and you might come in as an alternate or something as a sitting-in member as Ruth and, to see it through. Does anyone have any issues with that? I would think that if a Board of Select, if we took the time and the diligence and the volunteerism and you didn't get reelected, I personally would want that expertise.
Yeah, Jim's lucky, he's got 3 years.
Well, I'm lucky, thank you.
Well, for the committee, it'll be solved in
Yeah.
that thing. But as I say, myself, I don't know if anybody will run against me. I do plan on running. Whether anybody runs against me, I don't know. Depends how many people I ticked off.
And partly to answer your question, one of the things that we will do, Steve and I will do near the end of the process, is to write a summary of the changes. So, for example, there are probably going to be 7 or 8 places where we delete language that relates to something that happened in 1991. We're not going to have to go 8 times and tell everybody.
No.
We're going to say every time that there was a reference to 1991, we deleted that. So
Yeah.
we'll summarize some of that.
Not, it's
Exactly.
not appropriate at that time.
Bob, I have a question. Going through this whole process, going through the school committees, Board of Selectmen, and then to town meeting to get the people's approval, are we looking at October of 18 or May of 19?
It just depends on how quickly we move forward with what we do. Jim, I think we're going to have to play that by ear.
Okay.
We're certainly not trying to delay this process, but we're most certainly not trying to hurry it along to a date.
And that's why I asked.
The object of this committee is to get it perfect.
Yeah.
It hasn't been done since '91.
Just for input purposes, in Whitman, we would be looking at it at an annual town meeting. I don't see the town calling a special town meeting
No.
to vote a school committee.
I'd love to see us be ready.
It'd be nice if it's done for May of 18.
Maybe they
I don't see that.
You know, and just to Dan's point,
Oh, they don't have it.
when this is presented, it's like any other school committee presentation. We don't amend, we vote it up or down.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
We were going to talk about the timing in a little bit. We can,
Yeah.
since it's come up, we can do it now. Again, it depends on how many issues this group finds. Generally, we have recommended that this get voted on by the towns at fall town meetings, but we understand that one of your towns doesn't have a fall town meeting, which is fine. One of the places we worked, the school district actually funded that special town meeting in the fall so that all the towns, or both towns, in that case, all 3 towns could vote on it in the fall, but that certainly doesn't have to happen. We just sometimes, if there's a controversy about this, we don't, on any specific thing, we wouldn't want that to get caught up in a controversy about your budget in the spring. That's one concern, but it's happened both ways, so I think that can work. So what we will look at is, can we finish in time for warrant articles to go in your spring town meetings? That's going to be pretty, you can tell me when your warrant articles are necessary in each of your towns. Is that by February or March?
We're pretty flexible with that stuff. As far as I'm concerned, if this committee reaches an agreement and wants to present it to Whitman and we haven't published the warrant, we're going to put it on there.
Okay.
And I think Hanson, pretty much until you vote to publish, are open, so.
I think, Mac, from working with both towns for quite many, many years, if they had closed the warrant, I think they would open the warrant specifically to deal with this if we got that close. I mean, I know Hanson and we both know both towns. They're very, very.
Provided it hasn't been
work pretty
published
close.
and put out there.
Yeah, as long as there's time.
Most towns let a placeholder be put in the warrant so that
Yeah.
if you go by the
That's
date, you
interesting,
can stick in the
close.
exact
Pass over.
wording.
And that would happen here.
Yeah.
The only other issue in terms of the timing, if, for example, in your process, you think about doing something different with the assessments, although I haven't heard anything that you might be doing that, it would be difficult for the administration to have people vote on a change in April or May and assume that on July 1st, their books can all be redesigned to make that happen. So if that were to happen, our recommendation would be to wait till the following July 1st so that the administration would have time to organize the books.
Fred?
How quick would you get the ESC to approve of it anyways? Wouldn't you be voting on it to take effect the following year?
That's
I'm
the
just
other,
saying that, yeah.
that's the other issue, but we can't predict with them. Sometimes their turnarounds quite quickly, you know, so.
If you have a May town meeting, I think there's no way you're going to have it for FY '19.
Right, probably not.
You're going to be voting on it at town meeting for FY '20.
Right, exactly right.
I mean, at this point, we don't really even have a commissioner who passed away a month or so
Yeah.
ago, so they haven't decided what they're doing about that, I guess.
I mean, whether he's dead or alive, I mean.
Well,
Did you say the
Replacing them.
Did you say 2020?
Fiscal 20, which would be May of 19.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but May of '18, you would vote it,
Right, it would, I
but it would
would
not to
envision
take
this
effect
having a year
until July
to
of,
take effect so that there's
July.
time to plan. the
19.
budget.
July of '19, which would be
Yes.
FY '20.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
So we would be done in the spring.
And we've been operating under the current agreement many, many, many years. So we want to get this right, and if it just sits until it takes effect, I don't see that as problematic. Both towns are very cooperative.
And if there are any changes, you want both towns time to prepare, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
And,
I'm a guest.
if you find in your packet, there's a document that says initial meeting, at the top, Whitman Hanson, then regional agreement amendment process, initial meeting, and then this is the step-by-step, and I just want to emphasize a few things. And I made copies so that, or Michelle made copies so that you could take notes there if you want to, or later. But, so the very first bullet is the bottom line process, and I want to make something clear from what I've heard in the discussion. So eventually, this group is going to vote on the full changes. The school committee will then vote. We'll send it to the Department of Education for their preliminary look at that. Then the towns vote, and then the commissioner will sign off on it. Technically, at least by law, the selectmen do not have to vote on this. In most cases, they do. I'm just saying that's not part of the law. You can have the process where it means given to the selectmen, probably makes sense for the selectmen to vote on it. I'm just saying that's not part of the law.
Though they have to put it on, they have to vote to put it on the
Yes.
town meeting warrant, so
That's right.
effectively,
Right.
And they have to sign it.
right, effectively, they have to approve it anyway.
Well, they can approve it to place, but not.
Well, right,
Well,
right.
They have to approve to put it on there. They
They
don't
can kill it if they want to, let's put it that way.
School committee can put it on the annual.
You see that step one is putting the issues on the table. We're going to be going through it piece by piece, but if any of you know of issues that you want to make sure that we stop and address, that's what we would like to know at some point, either tonight or in the future as we go along. Step two is the agreement committee, which you're already doing. Step three is the timeline, which we've just talked about. Four is as Steve said, there are some legal issues that we need to address. There are some new regulations from ed reform that we need to address. And then what we found on every one of these is that there are some things that your regional school district is just doing differently than what somebody did in 1991. And we need to update your agreement so that it's in compliance or with what you're actually doing in some areas. Step five, we've talked about this committee, and all along, we've had a great relationship with DESE and Chris Lynch. I talk with her on a weekly basis about these projects, and she'll often say, I'll say, gee, at Whitman Hanson, that group decided they would like to include this language or delete this language, and she'll say, yeah, that's fine, or gee, maybe you need to think of it differently. So when the next time we come back, we will say, this is what the feedback we've gotten from the Department of Education. Is that okay, or you want to stick with what you came up with? Eventually, Chris Lynch or somebody's going to have to recommend it to the commissioner, so we want to keep them on board as we go along. Step 6 is making sure the community is involved, having a public forum. We've talked about that, meeting with the selectmen and the finance committees, hopefully in a single meeting, but getting the word out to members of the community. I was on a committee like yours in Acton Boxborough. 3 years ago, we went from the regional school district being 7 to 12 to now it's a pre-K to 12 like yours is. So I was on that committee sitting there as a volunteer. And we went out to the community and there was a sticking point. It seemed like a small thing we hadn't thought about, and there were people said, if you keep that in there, we're not going to support you. And it was something that didn't really matter to us. We changed the wording, and those people got on board. So it's important that you get information out to what you're doing to the public so you can get some feedback, and maybe there's something that we haven't thought about. Step 7, it goes to the school committee. The school committee has 3 choices, basically. They can accept what you have done in its entirety. They can make some modifications and say, yes, we like most of what you did, but here's one thing we'd like to tweak. Or they obviously can say, we don't want this to go forward. But again, whether you have 3 school committee members on here, hopefully people would be on board. And again, the object of having you represent your different boards is we assume that you're going back on your own meetings and reporting on what's happening at this meeting. So it's nothing is going to be a surprise to your committee at the end of the time here. So then we'll show the what you've done to the Department of Education. Step 9, the selectmen put this on a warrant for your community votes. Both communities will have to vote on this in the affirmative. It only takes a majority vote by your voters, and then it goes to the commissioner to sign off. And you've made a good point, Fred, that who knows how long that'll take. But generally, we found that the commissioner in the past is voted on something within 2 or 3 weeks, which is a pretty short time period. So we kind of rushed through that, but that's so when you get a chance to digest this, and we have other questions or questions now, but next time we certainly can address those.
Fred has a question.
Real quick, what happens if one town approves it and one town doesn't?
It's done. Doesn't happen.
So there's no super town meeting?
Start
It
over.
doesn't go to a super town meeting,
No.
whereas currently we
It's not
would.
like the assessment. It doesn't have that same process. It's just up or down. Both towns have to be affirmative.
Is there an ability to just have it go back to the school committee for changes? Or does it have to go all the way back to the beginning?
No, it could
Okay.
go back to the school committee, and they could either send it back
Amend
to
it.
this group or say, yeah, we're okay with what the objection was, and we'll make that change.
On that note, what happens, let's go, Hanson votes for the agreement, Whitman votes against it. That being said, some of the issues that were brought up, if we tweak it, does it have to go back to both towns or just
Yes.
Whitman?
Both towns.
Both towns.
Any
Because
change?
we've changed it.
Right.
Okay, okay.
What if it's sent back intact for a second try? With more community involvement, does it have to go back to both towns?
I
Or
think that would work.
So we just would have to go to the one town that
I think
turned
it
it
would only
down?
have to go to that town, as long as nothing else had changed.
But, Matt, can I ask a question just to follow up on Fred's? Would it really, through all these processes that this agreement is going to have to go through, is it really going to get all the way to town meeting before somebody balks at it? Or wouldn't that group that you talked about where you were at, and the change was made before it even went to a vote?
Right.
I mean, wouldn't, most likely it would be in the school committee or in the selectman's office or somewhere before it actually gets to town meeting, that a change could be made and then reviewed by the school committee again?
As I said, we've done 9 of these, and not one of them has failed at the town meeting because just of that. The objections that came along the way, and we fixed them. Right, good point.
Okay.
So-
I just thought it would be way too late if it got that far, that people weren't talking about it.
Well, you would hope
Well, that's, yeah.
that people would come forward, but as I think we've all seen at various town meetings, sometimes a faction gets together.
Fred, I would hope it's something
You
as
never
important
know.
as this, that people come out at the beginning if they don't like what we've done here, and they want something changed, and not wait to town meeting.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Well, I think, Jim, not to interrupt, I think that's part of what's incumbent upon this committee, is to make sure that we get to our meetings, we bring it out to the public, we talk it over, they watch it enough, anyone who's watching tonight comes to the next meeting, sits in the audience, brings up this stuff, so that's what these meetings are about. You know, we have certain times, I know there's different people on different boards here where people would say, I've never heard that. Now is the time to speak in the next 6 to 7 months. Come, voice your opinion, ladies and gentlemen. Be part of this process. This process is open to the public, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure of that.
Right? She still wants to push it.
Should I put my mic on?
Danny, I think they can hear you.
I don't know.
The light on?
I think it's on.
No, lights out. That's all right. They can hear you, Dan.
I see a light.
No, it's a reflection. Don't worry about it. It's probably one that doesn't have a light. That'll trick you.
Good.
It'll be the one I keep asking them to give me.
They don't have a light.
Steve, do you want to?
Okay, so in terms of the potential timeline, the only thing we've discussed that, I just want to be clear that we're talking about on the fast track, we would probably have to, the very optimistic timetable still has 2018 in its sight. But that would mean we'd have to get through the amendments and the agreement in the next, well, 6 weeks before February, probably. And again, optimistic but possible. The more typical, traditional way would be the July 1, 2019 date that you had mentioned. Okay, so that's, but it's, you know, we'll know after the next 3 meetings whether there are some really major issues that are going to slow us down.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on that?
Our next objective is, you don't have a copy of this, but you, Michelle sent you a copy of the regional agreement, and...
They have it.
Yep,
They have it in here.
we have it.
you have this?
It's attached.
Much cleaner copy.
No, I don't think, you know, I don't...
They have
think-
the actual.
Yes, you have the actual. I have some notes here that I don't think you have.
They don't have it.
So, what I'd like to do now is to, we have gone through your regional agreement and made notes on things. And I think in 15 or 20 minutes, we can just throw out the things that we think it would be good for you to look at. And then the plan is, whether we have time tonight or start with the next time, we'll go back to the beginning, take a section at a time, and we can say, this is something that we think you ought to look at. You can say what you want to do. So the suggestions will come from you about language changes. We'll have some suggestions based on our experience with this, and we probably will plagiarize from some other regional agreements. If you say, gee, I'd like to have something that says something about this, I'll bet we can find it in some other regional agreement. And it's surprising that there have probably been about, I think, at least 12 regional agreements that have been, or 15 maybe, that have been revised in the last 10 years. So, and that have all been approved by DESC. So there is language there that we can work from. You may know that I've been working with the South Shore Regional Vocational School for the last 10 months.
I'm on that school committee.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
And I have never been in a process that we've wordsmithed so much of an agreement.
It's only 50 years old.
And the superintendent there has been great, and there's a lot of good language in there that I think we might be able to borrow some of it, even though it's still, your towns belong to that, but it's been a good process. So, let me just take you through. So, Section 1, I'll try to point it out and have you take a look at it so you know what we're talking about. Section A, powers, duties, and composition. Steve mentioned this. It says clearly that there are going to be 10 members of your school committee. There will be 6 from Whitman and 4 from Hanson. So we need to add some language, as Steve said, that the law says that every 10 years of the federal census, school districts, regional schools have to look at the population of the two towns, not the student population, the actual population, and make sure that it's still in compliance with one person, one vote. Right now, your students as well as the population is pretty much 60-40, and so you have 6 school committee members and 4 school committee members, so that makes a difference. What if 15 years from now it becomes 50-50? There has to be some language in here that allows you to change the composition of your school committee without having to go through this whole process and redo your regional agreement, because there's no flexibility in there right now.
Doesn't Section D offer that?
Well, Section D is, you're right, but that's referring to a transition period of time. So we can incorporate some of that language. Some of that will be deleted, as I recall, because it talks about what happens in the first, and I made a note that that's kind of redundant. You're right, D, and so we can maybe move D up into that other part, but we'll put that together. Another recommendations in number 3 that we would probably try to generalize to say that you have to follow the rules of the Mass General laws and not be so specific about Section 16 to 161, because those have changed, and there are other things about regional schools in Chapter 71 that are outside of 16 to 161, so we would generalize that. And 4, it's about the transition period in 1992 that we probably could eliminate. 1B, the interim committee that we probably could delete. And then down to E is also about transition that we could probably delete that.
B, did you say?
Delete E?
B and E.
B and E.
Yes. Stop me or slow me down if I'm going too fast. I've read your agreement many times, probably more than you have in recent days. So, Section 3, location of the regional schools. It's very specific about where your high school is. You may want to keep it that specific on. It's interesting. It says off Franklin Street, but a lot of places have just said that all the schools in your district have to be in the member towns, so that if it ever moves, I can't imagine in our lifetimes or your lifetimes that the high school is going to move, but there's been a lot of changes with your elementary schools over the years, and so you may want to make that a little more flexible. There's a comment in Section A about pre-K to 8 students going to school in their hometowns, but there are 2 exceptions. One of them says, with the exception that the school committee can make a change. The other one says that there should be a recommendation of the superintendent and then a vote of the school committee. A recommendation would be that both of those would say the same, that any change from a student going to school in their hometown would be upon a recommendation of the superintendent and a vote of the school committee. I can't imagine the school committee would want to get involved with individual parents and deciding on who's going where, and yes, we'll let you go to this school, but now we're going to let you. And that's what the superintendent gets the big bucks for, make those decisions.
That actually has been brought up.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So lease of the present schools in B, Section 3B. There's a little bit of transition language there about leases will commence. Steve reviewed your leases. We have found that the leases from your 2 towns are the most comprehensive of any lease that we've ever seen.
I don't doubt that.
They're 6 or 7 pages, and Steve only found one difference. What would you want to mention that?
The non-exclusive right to fields clause in Section 17, page 7. It addresses youth soccer fields at the middle school.
For which town? Sorry.
This is, Whitman has the unique section. And it has to deal with the youth soccer fields at the middle school, the gymnasium use, and the town recreation department fields. So, that's the one that sticks out at you, but other than that, they're similar, and if they still work, they still work. They're a little cumbersome, and if we wanted to try and narrow the scope of them, we could try to do that, but they are comprehensive.
Those leases actually had to have special legislation to be approved due to the length of the lease. So I'm assuming that any changes that we'd have to make
Required approval from the state.
Yeah.
would have to go through the state as well.
So I told you this, even at the end of the next review, there'd still be X number of years left after the...
Because the law only requires a 20-year lease, or only allows, I should say.
Because of the MSBA funding, they insisted that the funding was intended to provide a building that would be suitable for 50 years, therefore, our leases had to reflect that term.
Really?
It was pretty odd. Remember it well.
Michelle, that wasn't, those leases weren't sent to people, were they?
I don't
Did this,
think
could they be then?
Sure.
So that you can all look at them and you can decide collectively whether you want to address them or you want to keep them the way they are.
Additional period of 20, so there's an extra 20.
Of course, there's a section about the current schools.
20 plus.
Obviously, the high school and the two middle schools are the same, but there are 4 schools that we saw that don't exist anymore that are on that list, and Steve has mentioned that the Mayquin Elementary School is closing. Is that true? Mm-hmm. So there are 2 ways to deal with that. One is to put... Pardon me?
You asked me where we are.
We're on section 3B, the third bullet. Oh, you don't have that, I'm sorry. That's on about the listing of schools.
Oh, okay.
So there are 2 ways to deal with that. One is to not list them specifically and just say that all the schools will be housed in your member towns, or that the pre-K to 8 schools will be in the town that services their children, or you can list whatever you think there's going to be the schools starting next year. So that's something to think about. Section 4, apportionment and payment of costs incurred by the district. So A is classification of costs. One thing that the Department of Education will not allow to continue, and yours is similar to everybody else's. And by the way, I've probably read 30 regional agreements or more. Somebody, we believe it's Henry Hall from Ropes and Gray, 50 years ago wrote the first regional agreement, and they're all, we're almost word for word the same. There's some little tweaks in them, but very similar. But they all have said that the district can levy assessments against the member towns. And the Department of Education say, no, the district cannot levy the town. That there's a process that you go through before that happens. So we can suggest some language that will fix that, but not use the word levy. Also, under A, under classification of costs, what we've been doing is generally, your agreement talks about operating and capital. There are actually 4 classifications of costs that your district has to deal with, also transportation and debt. So we generally have been writing something about all 4 of those: operating, capital, transportation, and debt, and making some description of what they mean, like you have for 2 of them, and then how they're assessed. So it makes it clear to everybody without having to guess about what happens with transportation and debt. B, section 4B, under capital costs. There's some language that says, as relating to the elementary schools in each town, capital costs shall include but not be limited to such items of expense described above as exceed $5,000. And it's written in hand, it's not typed into your agreement, and it says it was voted on January 14th, 1998, with a 5-3 vote. So obviously...
But it was only voted in one town.
Right. So technically, that doesn't exist.
Doesn't really exist. No.
Even though...
Only approved in Hanson, it was never approved in Whitman.
The version you got is, Michelle, I don't know if you retyped it or somehow.
Somebody, yeah, we had somebody.
It was
retyped
typed
it,
and that
but-
was put in, but that really should just be in parentheses because it was only approved in one town.
The original agreement that we've been looking at has that written in...
It's written by Laura Haas in little handwriting.
So-
Yep. Handwritten.
So assuming that you don't want to include that, it's not in the type version that you have. Section 4D.
Wait a minute, I have a question there.
That'll be a topic.
Go ahead, Jim.
How the hell can, I'm sorry.
It's being recorded, yes.
Yes. How can you have an agreement that exists between two towns to create a region, and only one town agrees to a certain thing, and
No, well, it's exactly what they said before, Jim. It's not valid, wasn't real.
Okay. So, just to clarify, so there is, the agreement that we have in our packets was somebody typed up a clean copy, correct? It's
Right.
not
Yes.
an actual
About 5 years.
binding agreement between the two towns, because that copy's a
The
little
signed
rough or
copy, which everyone has, which was done on an Apple IIe, has in tiny little writing on the bottom that there was this vote that was done but it was never an amendment to the agreement. It never went to DESI. It wasn't approved by both town meetings.
So what you have is the binding agreement.
But this is just a retyped version on a real computer.
yes, I know.
Yeah.
So this isn't valid. I'm not sure what.
So the threshold for a capital expense would be 0.
It would be the
So-
same as it was when the agreement was approved in
The
1991.
towns are each responsible for any capital repair that the district suffers.
So it's your definition of capital. Right.
Yeah, and we ought to address that definition.
That's something that needs to be cleaned up.
Right.
Right,
Particularly since the two towns may have a different definition.
Different have.
right.
Well, that's why that needs to be clarified, absolutely.
Because you're going to have, what would you consider the difference between a capital expense and a,
Isn't this the meat of it that you want to get?
Typically, useful life, useful life of the expense.
yeah,
You have
or
regu-
maintenance, or maintenance issue?
You know, think about if you're a landlord.
Right, this is,
There's certain things you expect your tenant to take care of on a regular basis, but if if your tenant's hot water heater goes down, you probably have to
Right.
repair that as the owner.
Right, like you-
I think that's one way to think about it. What's
right.
the difference
Are
between...
we eventually going to have a dollar factor in here?
I'm sorry?
We're going to eventually have a dollar factor in?
That's
I
what
don't
we're,
know
wor-
that. That's why
that's
you're
what
working.
we're working towards,
Right,
Danny.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's up to the committee.
didn't work the last time.
Be first on one.
If I'm not mistaken, the original agreement defines a capital expense as an extraordinary and
Right
sudden.
here, you'll see it.
Extraordinary repairs to school, extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
Remodeling or extraordinary repairs.
Well, we'll have to save at least 2 minutes on the agenda when we get to that, I guess. right?
Yeah, you better.
Minutes.
I mean, Hanson has a very definitive definition of what a capital expense is, in terms of life expectancy, dollar amount, et cetera.
I think that's important to have a
Yeah.
common
Yeah,
understanding of that.
I mean, we got that needs work.
Definitely.
Another issue that you may or may not want to address that some districts have in terms of a D, apportionment of capital costs. Your agreement talks about basing that on actual school enrollment of the students from each town. Some districts have gone to foundation enrollment, which is the actual total number of students in your towns that could go to your school. So kids who go off to private schools, for example. There are places where some places are concerned that a private school is closing and that all of a sudden 75 new kids are coming into their building, and so they're anticipating that, and so when they talk about the assessment of capital costs, they want to include all the kids in the town who could go to their school. That's not very likely, but we're just throwing that out as something that some schools do. In terms of debt, one thing that I do think, we do think would warrant some discussion. Every place that talks about debt in your agreement says that it has to go to the voters for approval. There are two pieces to that law and that talks about, it's Chapter 71, 16, D and N. D says that if the school district committee votes on a capital expense, it goes to the selectmen. The selectmen have 60 days in which to decide if they want to take it to the voters. For example, if if a boiler blew up and the district says we need a capital expense for the next 4 years to borrow some money to pay for that, the selectmen might say, we're not going to have a town meeting just to talk about replacing the boiler in January because it needs to be done, and so it doesn't go to the voters. N says that, like it's written in yours, that it has to go to the voters no matter what the circumstance. So that'd be at least something I'd like to have this group discuss about whether you'd like to have both of those options in your regional agreement.
What we've done in the past is like when we had a boiler break and the selectmen, it needed to get done. I think it was, what, $16,000 or something like that. And we had it done, and we said that we would put it on the annual town meeting and we'd get it paid for there, which had happened. So, I mean, I think...
I think the difference that you're looking at is the difference between Whitman Hanson and South Shore. When South Shore makes a debt commitment, we're presented with the information, we have 60 days to respond. It is presumed to have been approved if we don't respond within 60 days.
That's correct.
And when we do respond, our vote isn't to approve it, our vote is to disallow.
Right.
That's where that whole issue came up. I don't want to relive it, but...
No.
Okay, well, that's up to you. Section 4E, apportionment of operating costs. There's some transition language there that we can delete. Something you have in your agreement that I hadn't seen before talked about special operating costs. Is that something that you've ever used? So it looks like if one of your elementary schools, you want to do something different that doesn't happen out in the town, in the other towns' elementary schools, you technically could assess your community for that. It's kind of a slippery slope, I think. But you ever used that? No. So you'll have to decide whether you want to keep that in there. One of the things that we would ask Ruth and Christine, under F, there are dates at which the towns pay their assessments. August 1st, November, February, and April. And my only question would be, are those dates still okay? And we should ask the district if that's still okay. And if it is, obviously nothing changes. Section 5, transportation. I have read this, I don't know how many times, and I honestly don't understand what this says. This is a quote, and this is my understanding of it. I hope I wrote it down the right way. If the regional committee decides not to provide non-mandatory busing, an article will be presented to the selectman's office of each town for approval by the voters. So what that says to me, if the school committee decides to allow non-mandatory busing, you don't have to ask anybody. But if you don't want to do it, you have to ask. That's the way it reads to me. Am I misreading that?
That's what it says.
Oh, right.
That's...
We haven't invoked it, but that's what it says.
I've got to believe that was a mistake.
In Whitman, we have a line item for non-mandated busing. So we're told what that cost would be, and it's a separate line item in our Article 2 for non-mandated busing under the regional school.
But this says if they're going to do that, they don't have to ask you. That's the way I read it.
Well, then we don't have to pay them.
Well,
anyway,
I think
it needs to be
cleaned up.
It needs to be cleaned up.
Clean it up.
I believe Ruth has the authority to bus everyone without charging us, but
I don't think so.
Section 7, admission of additional towns. Our recommendation is that we expand this. You have a paragraph, as I recall, And, for example, one of the things that we've been writing in other agreements is comment that allows the school committee and the town to negotiate something for another town to come in. I don't know, you may be surrounded by towns who would never want to or be able to get into your district, but if in fact someone wanted to join you, you have no provisions that would say this is what it's going to cost you to join, because you're going to have to buy into the debt that we have, for example, or whatever. So we just think that should be expanded a little bit. Section,
I don't think so.
let's read this. Is section 7 or is it 8 that's withdrawal? I wrote 2 sevens.
8.
Okay, 8. One of the things that we have found with the limitation, it basically is saying that if someone wants to withdraw, they have to be responsible for the debt that was incurred while they were a member of their district. Obviously, that makes sense.
Yep.
The DESE is suggesting that we add a little more language. For example, OPEB, that you're all having to deal with. Out in the Gateway Regional School Districts, there were 7 communities. Worthington got their legislator to go in a midnight session and get them out of the region without the other 6 towns voting on it. And because it didn't specifically say they were responsible OPEB, they're not willing to assume any responsibility, even though they've been part of the region for many, many years. So there are a few things we just need to make it a little more clear that if anybody's leaving, there are responsibilities that go with that.
Did that hold up?
Yes.
No one challenged that?
Well, the other, actually, I think 3 of the other 6 towns are suing Worthington for that.
I would assume all 6 would have been involved in that. You created a debt, and now you're not holding up your end.
Right. So
I'd like to show
No different than Silver Lake and Pembroke.
Yeah.
Right. Our sheriff's department.
It's 8E, about payment of certain capital costs made by the withdrawing town. It's no longer necessary to say that you have to, let's say one town gets out from K to 8 and they have some debt. They give you a lump sum for their debt for the next 10 years or whatever is left on that. Your agreement, as all others did, said it has to be deposited in a Massachusetts bank or trust company that has a minimum of $5 million of assets. So that's not necessary anymore. We assume that your district will do the right thing with that money.
In the 50s, that was a lot of money.
Section 9, withdrawing of elementary grades pre-kindergarten through 8. I think you may be only one of 2 districts in the state that have this in there, that either town can pull out of pre-K to 8 without the other town's permission. That's very unusual, and the state is, the other one, I worked in Dayton Rehoboth for 2 years on their agreement, and even though I inappropriately said that they were all successfully done, and Dayton Rehoboth is not resolved. After 2 years of work, they haven't gotten something that's the school committee has accepted yet. But anyway, they are the other one that has that, because just like you, it sounds like in 1991 or 92, you agreed to put your pre-K to 8 students in the region, and that was one of the provisions that you could get out by yourselves. And so
that was necessary to get into the region.
That's what they said at Dayton Rehoboth also.
Yeah. There was so much controversy over it that had to be put in there in order to give the voters a level of comfort that we could regionalize K through 8.
Right. So you'll have to decide if that's, I think, we pushed it hard enough at Dayton Rehoboth, so I think that the state will accept that, but they don't want to accept that. So you'll have to decide, are you really committed to your PK to 12 region, or do you still want to have an out clause there? Let's see, section 10 about the budget. There's things about the initial budget that can be deleted. There's transition language in several places here. And C says, final capital and operating budget, and there's a quote that says, "And each town shall appropriate the amount so certified to it." Again, we need to work on the language a little bit. It's kind of like saying that the district can force the towns to pay something without the vote, so we'll just talk about the process there. Tuition students. Sometimes this is a little controversial for selectmen and finance committee members. Things have changed since that language was written in there 50 years ago. It says that any tuition money you receive has to be used to offset the next fiscal year's assessment. And that was before school choice, for example. You get money for school choice, and obviously that doesn't mandate it to go back into the assessment. Obviously, this district uses that to offset their budget. And the other thing is that, I'm not sure you've done that here, but in many places, you might have 2 children that have a very specific special need, and it's going to cost you $100,000 for each of them to go out someplace. But if you had 2 more kids that you could tuition in from some other school district and use that money, you could have a program to offset the cost of it and save money for your district. And therefore, that would not be technically going back to lower the assessment. So our recommendation has been to take out that sentence that says that no matter what, that money is going to be used to offset the next year's assessment. In general, that just goes into the budget process, and I'm sure in general it has that effect, but that's something we'd like to have you at least talk about. And then pretty much the rest of it can be deleted. Section 13 is about employment of personnel and extension of tenure. When districts became regions back in the 50s and 60s, this law was put in that said that districts could not fire all the teachers and only hire back the ones they wanted. And that doesn't relate to you anymore. Well, you might like it to do that, but it doesn't relate to that anymore because you're not starting a new region. 14, jurisdiction is also transition language. 15 talks about an advisory council on education. Is this still a relevant thing? No. So we can decide if that can be deleted. Section 16 about is also transition language. 17 is more transition language. And the only thing is at the end, in terms of the signatures, what the state requires that either all school committee members or just the chair of the school committee can sign off on this. But the key is that either a chair of the selectmen or the town town clerk has to sign off on it, and the clerk is just to verify that there was a vote taken in the town and that it was approved. So that's kind of different than what are the signatures in most agreements. So that's a quick run through of all the issues that we saw. As you can see, there are a couple that might take a few minutes to discuss, but otherwise I think there are not a lot of major red flags there, and we should be able to get through a lot of it fairly simply. So I guess we can entertain questions. I guess at this time I was just looking, it's 1/4 or a little after 1/4, that maybe we want to, or you have questions, end it there, and we'll start at the beginning next time, unless you want to take 10 minutes and start through it. You've got a lot to absorb. And if you get out 10 minutes early, would you mind?
As you can see, as we went through this, they have taken a comprehensive look at the whole agreement in itself and all of its languages, and it's going to take some time on some of these things to go through. And the reason I'm stating this again, and I hate to be redundant, but we tell people we do everything we can to get them to come to a meeting so the dialogue is open and transparent and they can come and see it, talk about it and discuss it so we don't get to town meeting. So anyone that might be watching, please try to attend the next meeting, which if you look on the front page, number 7, the next meeting is October 30th, 2017. and it'll be here at 6 o'clock at the Whitman Hanson Regional Library, and it will last approximately an hour and a half. The only reason it may go a little longer if we're right in the middle of taking a vote on something, we may hold it just a little bit longer, but basically, those are the ground rules for our meeting. And we would appreciate anyone that's watching from a member town to please come and ask these questions. Or if you can't come, get a hold of someone that you see sitting here and make sure that your voice is heard, because it's the only way, when this new agreement comes out, that we're going to be able to change it and have the true input of all the people. So I'm asking anyone who might be watching to please come forward. You will be heard. This is an open meeting. This is what we're doing it for. These gentlemen are here to get this agreement changed and reviewed and updated so we can bring it forward. Does anyone have any questions?
I just mentioned about the dates, or what we've negotiated with Ruth is generally the fourth Monday of the month, but you'll notice, so October 30th, I believe, is, December 4th is not, and we talked about that, it's kind of in between the two holidays, as opposed to being right at Thanksgiving and having one right at the other December holiday. So that's in the middle, but the rest of them are all the fourth Monday of the month, so hopefully we can all get that in our schedules.
Exactly. Does everyone see the meeting dates? Just to keep it so every meeting, I'll announce the new meeting date. The next meeting, again, is October 30th, 2017, here in the Whitman Hanson Library, 6 o'clock in the evening. The meetings are going to last approximately an hour and a half. We urge everyone to please attend if you have any interest in discussing the regional agreement review. Questions, anyone? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
November.